Welcome back to the channel where medical topics are made easy. In this video, we're going to focus on common medical suffixes, and before we get started, make sure to turn on the captions and read along. You might remember from the videos on prefixes and roots that most medical words have a beginning, middle, and end. They're referred to as the prefix, root, and suffix. The prefix is typically the descriptive part of the word, and it describes characteristics like a color, amount, size, location, or position. The root is the subject of the term, and it often pertains to a body part or system. Finally, the suffix brings meaning to the word, and it might describe a procedure, test, diagnosis, condition, or process. Some medical words don't have a prefix, and if that's the case, then the root's going to form the beginning of the word. And some medical words might have more than one root combined together. We already went over common medical abbreviations, prefixes, and roots in previous videos, and they're going to be linked down below in the description. Now we're going to focus on common medical suffixes and their meanings. We're also going to go through a number of examples which should be helpful because many of the examples contain the prefixes and roots that we already learned about. You might surprise yourself with how much you know by breaking down the word, and this helps to simplify medical terminology. So make sure to watch the entire video and stay tuned until the end. Let's begin with common suffixes that have to do with procedures. Hit pause in the video quick and see how many you can name before looking at the answers. First, we have ostomy, which means to surgically create an artificial opening or stoma. An example medical term is colostomy, which is a surgery that creates a new opening for the colon to pass through the abdominal wall. We know from the root video that colo means colon, and now we know ostomy means creating a new opening. So it makes sense that colostomy is creating a new opening for the colon. You're going to see many of the suffixes in the table start with the letter O. This is the combining vowel, and it's what combines the root to the suffix. Just know that there might be a different vowel other than O that combines the two word elements together. Next is otomy, which means to make an incision or cut into. An example is laparotomy. We learned in the root video that laparo means abdomen or abdominal wall. So now we know laparotomy is a surgical incision into the abdominal cavity. Be careful with ostomy and otomy because they sound similar. The next suffix is ectomy, which means the surgical removal or excision of. For example, a nephrectomy is the surgical removal of a kidney or part of a kidney. And this makes sense because we learned in the root video that nephro means kidney. Next is oscopy, which relates to the examination or viewing of, especially with the scope, which is an instrument used for viewing or observing. Examples include cystoscopy, colonoscopy, or arthroscopy. You can figure out the body part being viewed by breaking down the root word, most of which we learned in the previous videos. Cysto refers to the bladder, so cystoscopy is the use of a scope to visualize the inside of the bladder. Colo refers to the colon, so colonoscopy is the use of a scope to visualize the inside of the colon. And arthro refers to joint, so arthroscopy is the use of a scope to visualize the inside of a joint. The next suffix is centesis, which refers to puncture or aspiration of. Examples include pericardiocentesis, thoracentesis, or arthrocentesis. Again, the root word will help you figure out what part of the body is being aspirated. Pericardio refers to the pericardium of the heart, so pericardiocentesis means the removal of fluid buildup in the pericardium, which is the sac around the heart. Thora refers to the chest or thorax. So thoracentesis is the aspiration of fluid or air from the pleural space of the chest cavity, which is the space between the lungs and chest wall. Finally, we just said arthro means joint, so arthrocentesis is the puncture of a joint, especially for the aspiration of fluid from the joint space. Next is plasty, which refers to a surgical procedure for the repair, restoration, or replacement of a part of the body. Again, the root word will tell you the subject of the term. For example, rhinoplasty is a surgery that changes the shape of the nose. And this makes sense because we learned in the root video that rhino means nose. Next, we have otripsy, which means crushing. An example medical term is lithotripsy. And we know from the root video that litho means stone. So lithotripsy refers to a procedure to crush a stone, such as a kidney stone. The next suffix is desis, which means binding or fusing together. For example, pleurodesis is the procedure of fusing or adhering the layers of the pleura together. Remember, the pleura is the thin membrane covering the lungs and lines the inside of the chest wall. And this prevents the buildup of fluid or air in the pleural cavity. Next is scope, which refers to the instrument used to view or observe a body part. We alluded to this earlier when talking about the suffix oscopy, which was the procedure of using a scope to view or examine. Again, the root word will describe the subject of the term and what is being viewed. For example, an otoscope is the instrument used to examine the ear, or an ophthalmoscope is the instrument used to view and examine the eye. And this makes sense because we learned in the root video that oto means ear and ophthalmo means eye. Finally, we have opsy, which means examination or inspection. A common example is biopsy, which is the removal of cells or tissues for examination, usually by a pathologist. Or you can think of autopsy, which is the examination of a body after death to determine a cause or to examine the extent of a disease. Let's move on to common suffixes pertaining to a test. The three terms shown in the table look the same and have similar meaning, so let's break them down. First, we have gram, which means a record or a picture. You could think of electrocardiogram, also known as an ECG or EKG, which is a recording of the electrical activity of the heart. Next, we have graph, which is the instrument used to record or take a picture. For example, an electrocardiograph is the instrument used to record the electrical activity of the heart. In other words, the electrocardiograph is the machine that produces the electrocardiogram. Finally, we have graphy, which means to record or to take a picture. It's the actual act or process of recording or taking a picture. For example, electrocardiography means to record the electrical activity of the heart. So to recap, gram refers to the actual record or image, graph refers to the machine that obtains the record or takes the picture, and graphy refers to the actual process of obtaining that record or taking the picture. Let's continue with common suffixes that have to do with signs and symptoms. First, we have itis, which means inflammation. We've seen a few examples of itis in the past few videos, but a common one is arthritis. Again, we know arthro refers to joint, so arthritis is inflammation of the joints. Next, we have paresis, which means weakness. Hemiparesis is weakness to one side of the body, and this makes sense because we learned in the prefix video that hemi means one half. And this is a good example of a medical term that uses a prefix followed by a suffix. All of the examples through now have been a root followed by a suffix. The next suffix is plegia, which refers to paralysis. For example, quadriplegia means paralysis of all four limbs. It's another prefix and suffix combination where quadra means four. Moving on to rhea, this means discharge or flow. An example is rhinorrhea, which is a runny nose or nasal discharge, which makes sense because we know rhino refers to nose. Another example is otorrhea, which is discharge or liquid drainage from the ear. Again, we know oto refers to ear. Next is edema, which is swelling or the accumulation of fluid. An example is blepharodema, and we know from the root video that blepharo refers to the eyelid. So blepharodema is swelling of the eyelid. The next one is odynia, which means pain or discomfort. For example, osteodynia is pain in a bone, with osteo meaning bone as we learned before. Next we have spasm, which refers to sudden muscle contraction. You can think of vasospasm, which is sudden constriction of a blood vessel, which makes sense because vaso relates to a blood vessel. Moving on to ridge or ragia, this means excessive flow or discharge. You can think of hemorrhage, which is the copious or heavy discharge of blood from a blood vessel. And this makes sense because hemo means blood. It can be easy to confuse this with rhea, so be careful. Remember, rhea is discharge or flow, while ragia is excessive discharge or flow. Finally, we have algia, which means pain. An example is cephalgia, which is the medical term for headache. We know from the root video that cephalo refers to head. Another example is neuralgia. Can you figure out the meaning of this? We know neuro refers to nerve, so neuralgia means nerve pain. Let's move on to a group of common descriptive suffixes. First we have megaly, which means irregular enlargement. You can think of hepatomegaly. We know from the root video that hepato means liver, so hepatomegaly is the abnormal enlargement of the liver. Another example is cardiomegaly, which is the abnormal enlargement of the heart. Next is ical, which means small, microscopic, little, or minute. An example is denticle, which means small tooth or tooth-like projection, and this makes sense because we know dento refers to teeth. The next suffix is constriction, which pertains to narrowing or contracting. You can think of vasoconstriction, which is the narrowing of blood vessels. The opposite of that is dilation, which pertains to expanding, widening, or stretching. If we use blood vessels as an example again, vasodilation is the widening of blood vessels. A similar suffix is eurism, which also means expand or widen. A common example is aneurysm, which is an abnormal bulge or ballooning in the wall of a blood vessel, and this causes the blood vessel to expand or widen. Next we have genesis, which means the development or production of something. Another meaning is to form. You can think of neurogenesis, which is the formation or development of neurons. Finally, we have stasis, which is the stoppage or slowdown of the flow of blood or bodily fluids. We can use blood as an example again, where hemostasis means the stoppage or cessation of bleeding or blood flow. So hemorrhage referred to bleeding, whereas hemostasis refers to the cessation of bleeding. Let's wrap it up with a group of general suffixes you're likely to see. First is cele, which means hernia or swelling. A simple example is gastrocele, which is a hernia in part of the stomach. We know from the root video that gastro refers to stomach, so this makes sense. Next is genic, which means caused by or produced by. You can think of cardiogenic, which means arising in the heart or caused by a heart condition. Another example is nephrogenic, which means originating in the kidney. In addition to genic, there's also other suffixes that can mean pertaining to or related, and they're shown on the screen. Moving on to ism, this refers to a medical condition, disease, or process. For example, hyperthyroidism is the condition in which the thyroid gland is overactive. There are also a group of other suffixes that mean condition, disease, or process, and they're shown on the screen as well. Next we have ologist, which refers to a specialist or a person who studies or has knowledge of a particular area of study. You can think of a pulmonologist, who is a specialist in the anatomy and pathophysiology of the lungs. Next is ology, which is the study of. In the last example, the pulmonologist was the actual person, whereas pulmonology is the study of the lungs. The next suffix is oma, which refers to a tumor or growth. You can think of melanoma, which is a tumor of the melanin-forming cells. The next two examples were on the list of conditions and diseases. We have pathy, which refers to a disease, such as cardiomyopathy, and we have osis, which refers to a condition, such as tuberculosis. Moving on to penia, this means deficiency. An example is pancytopenia, which is a deficiency of all types of blood cells, including white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. Next, we have apnea, which refers to breathing or respiration. We learned in the prefix video that tachy means fast or rapid, so tachypnea is fast or rapid breathing. Finally, we have emia, which means blood or a condition that relates to blood. You can think of anemia, which is a condition marked by a deficiency of red blood cells or hemoglobin in the blood. Hopefully this helped you better understand medical terminology and suffixes. If you found the video useful, please hit the like button and comment down below. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already. This way you don't miss out on future videos that make medical topics easy. And as always, you can find all of the notes and tables for this video on the website linked down below in the description. Thanks for watching, and hope you check out future videos.